I don't remember the last time I wasn't exhausted. Every morning I wake up before the sun rises, my body aching before my feet even hit the floor. Work is relentless. The bills keep stacking up. I never thought I'd be in this deep. Owing, money left and right, my old truck on its last legs, barely enough food in the fridge to get us through the week. Sarah and I used to joke about struggling when we first got married, but this isn't funny. And then, things got worse. Sarah lost her job. She sat across from me at our tiny, cluttered kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had gone cold. Her eyes were fixed on the chipped rim, unfocused, distant. "They cut my whole department," she finally said, her voice small. I let out a slow breath, rubbing the back of my neck. This wasn't something we could afford, not now. We sat in silence for a long time. Days turned into weeks, and things spiraled fast. Sarah spent every waking hour searching for jobs, sending out applications, waiting for responses that never came. The more time passed, the less she talked. The longer she sat on the couch staring at her laptop, the more I could feel her slipping away into some place I couldn't reach. I picked up extra shifts, working until my body couldn't take it anymore. But no matter how much I pushed myself, it wasn't enough. One night, I came home to find Sarah still in her pajamas, sitting at the table, a pile of unopened bills beside her. The air in the apartment felt thick, suffocating. "We can't keep doing this," I muttered, running a hand down my face. Sarah didn't look at me. "What do you want me to do?" The way she said it, flat, emotionless, made something tighten in my chest. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind running through every possible solution. And then, I thought of the farm. My parents' farm wasn't perfect, but it was steady. My dad could use the help, and Sarah, she needed a break from all of this. From the weight of failure pressing down on her. Maybe getting her away from the apartment. From the rejection emails. From me working myself to death would help. When I brought it up, she hesitated. "You want me to leave?" "No," I said quickly. "I just think it'd be good for you. My dad's getting older. My brother can't do everything on his own. You'd have something to do. Something to focus on." She traced a finger along the rim of her mug. Thinking. "And you?" she asked. "I'll fix things," I promised. A week later, I drove her to the farm. It was just as I remembered. Dusty roads leading to wide fields. The old house with its peeling white paint, the porch swing creaking in the wind. My dad was waiting for us, cigarette in hand, a tired smile on his face. My younger brother Danny leaned against the truck, arms crossed, nodding in greeting. Sarah stepped out of the truck and stretched, taking in the open sky. The tension in her shoulders eased, just a little. Dad pulled her into a quick hug, clapping her back like she was one of us. Danny gave her a lopsided grin, tossing a lazy "welcome to hell" her way before heading toward the barn. And then there was my mother. She stood on the porch, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line. "Families stay together," she said, before turning and walking inside. Sarah shot me a nervous glance, but I squeezed her hand. "She'll come around," I muttered. Sarah adapted faster than I thought she would. Within days, she was waking up with the sun, helping with the cows, collecting eggs from the chicken coop. She learned how to stack hay, how to clean the horse stalls, how to drive the old tractor. One day she came back to the house covered in mud, hair sticking to her face, grinning like a kid. "Fell in the pen," she admitted, peeling off her jacket. I think the pigs laughed at me. Even my mom smirked at that. Every time I visited, I saw her change a little more. Her skin tanned, her hands roughened, but she looked lighter, happier. "You look good," I told her one evening as we sat on the porch. She smiled, tucking her legs under her. "I feel good." And I believed her. Months passed. I worked myself to the bone, but things started to turn around. Got a better job, one that actually paid enough to get us out of the hole. I saved every cent, paid off our debts, found a real house, not the tiny, suffocating apartment we had before. When I finally went to the farm to bring her home, I expected her to be excited. She hugged me tight, kissed me like she meant it. But there was something, just the smallest hesitation. Maybe it was how she lingered before saying goodbye to Danny. Maybe it was how she sighed softly when we pulled out of the driveway. Or maybe it was just in my head. Either way, I ignored it. Because things were finally looking up. We had a new beginning ahead of us, and I needed to believe in that. I never thought I'd be a father. Not because I didn't want kids. Sarah and I had talked about it before. But because life had a way of making me feel like I wasn't ready. I was always too busy, too broke, too damn tired. But the moment she told me she was pregnant, all those thoughts disappeared. I still remember that night. I had come home late, exhausted as usual, my hands still covered in grease from a long shift. Sarah was in the kitchen, waiting. She looked nervous, like she didn't know how to start. "I have something to tell you," she said, fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. I was too tired to think straight. "Everything okay?" She bit her lip, hesitating. Then, in the softest voice, she said it. "I'm pregnant." For a second, I just stood there, letting the words sink in. Then it hit me. A laugh escaped me, pure, disbelieving joy. "Are you serious?" She nodded, a small smile breaking through. And just like that, everything changed. The next few months passed in a blur. I worked harder than ever, saving every penny, fixing up the spare room in our new house. I repainted the walls, put together a crib, read every parenting book I could get my hands on. I wanted to be ready. Sarah changed too. She was glowing, happier, lighter, like she had finally found her purpose. She started knitting little sweaters, humming to herself in the mornings. It was the first time in a long time that everything felt right. The night she went into labor, I almost lost my mind. She woke me up in the middle of the night, gripping my arm. "It's time." I barely remember driving to the hospital, barely remember the hours of pacing the cold hallways, the sound of her screaming from the delivery room. It was the longest night of my life. And then, suddenly, it was over. The nurse placed a tiny, wrinkled, red-faced baby in my arms, and my heart nearly stopped. A boy. My son. My hands trembled as I held him, staring down at the little life we had created. He was perfect. He was mine. I kissed Sarah's forehead, whispering, "You did it. He's beautiful." She smiled, exhausted, but something in her eyes, just for a second, looked distant, almost guilty. I didn't think much of it then. I was too happy to notice. The first few months were a whirlwind of exhaustion and love. Bottles, diapers, late-night feedings, pacing the floors to get him to sleep. Work was harder than ever. But every time I came home and saw Sarah cradling our son, every time I held him close and felt his tiny fingers wrap around mine, it was worth it. I was a father. This was my family. But then slowly, things started to feel off. At first, it was little things I could brush off. The baby's hair. It was lighter than mine, lighter than Sarah's, a soft, sandy blonde that neither of us had. Maybe it'll darken, I told myself. His eyes, bright blue, striking. Sarah's eyes were brown, mine were green. Recessive genes, I reasoned. It happens. I ignored the way my mother hesitated before commenting on how much he looked like Sarah. The way my brother Danny glanced at me when he thought I wasn't looking. Then came the jokes. "He doesn't have your nose," my dad said once, rocking the baby on his knee. Sarah tensed beside me, but I laughed it off. "Good, my nose is crooked." The comments didn't stop. "Doesn't look like you at all," my aunt muttered one Thanksgiving, squinting at him like she was solving a puzzle. I forced a smile. "He's still little. Babies change." But even as I said it, something inside me twisted. The more time passed, the harder it got to ignore. He was growing fast, faster than I remembered babies growing. His face was changing, features sharpening, but none of them were mine. I found myself staring at him longer than I should have, searching for something, anything that connected us. Nothing. The shape of his eyes, the curve of his lips, the way. His dimples appeared when he laughed. I saw Sarah in him, but I didn't see me. One night I sat at the edge of our bed, staring at an old photo of myself as a baby. Same age, different face. Sarah walked in, her hair damp from the shower. She paused when she saw me. "What are you looking at?" I hesitated, then turned the photo toward her. "Does he look like me?" She laughed, but there was a flicker of something else beneath it. "Of course he does," I swallowed. "Really look, Sarah," she rolled her eyes. "You're being ridiculous." I forced myself to nod. "Yeah, maybe." But that night, as I lay beside her, staring at the ceiling, my stomach churned, because I couldn't shake the feeling. Something wasn't right. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to know the truth. I had never known a silence so loud, the kind that settles deep into your bones, heavy, suffocating. The kind that lingers in the back of your mind, whispering doubts, twisting your gut until you can't eat, can't sleep, can't think straight. That's what it felt like, waiting for the DNA test results. At first, I thought I was crazy, thought I was being paranoid, letting the stress get to me. But the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. It kept creeping back in, poisoning every moment I spent with my son. No, not my son. The thought sent a sharp pain through my chest, but I pushed it down. I needed proof. I went to the clinic alone, my hands shaking as I handed over the swab. The nurse gave me a sympathetic smile, like she could already see the answer written all over my face. 2 weeks, she said. 2 weeks of waiting. 2 weeks of forcing myself to act normal, to come home every night and kiss my wife, hold my son, pretend that my world wasn't teetering on the edge of destruction. 2 weeks of rehearsing all the ways I'd tell myself I was wrong. But when the email finally came, when I opened that cold clinical report and read the words, probability of paternity, 0% everything stopped. I stared at the screen, my breath trapped in my chest. My vision blurred, my ears buzzed, my body went completely still, as if my brain needed time to process the wreckage of my life. Then suddenly, all I could hear was my own breathing, ragged, uneven, like I'd just been punched in the gut. Wasn't his father. The words repeated in my head over and over until they didn't even sound real anymore. I wasn't his father. Sarah had cheated. She had looked me in the eye, carried my child, no, not mine, and let me believe. Let me build. A life around a lie. I slammed the laptop shut so hard it nearly broke. The chair scraped against the floor as I shot to my feet, my pulse pounding so loud I could feel it in my skull. I needed answers. Now. I drove home like a madman, barely seeing the road. My hands clenched the wheel, my teeth grinding so hard my jaw ached. When I walked through the door, Sarah was in the kitchen, rocking the baby in her arms. She looked up and smiled, but the moment she saw my face, her expression shifted. Something in her eyes flickered. Fear. "What's wrong?" she asked softly. I held up my phone, the DNA results still glowing on the screen. She frowned. "What is... You lied to me." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. I took a slow step forward, my whole body shaking. "I'm not his father." The color drained from her face. What? I shoved the phone into her hands. "Read it!" She did, and then, to my disbelief, she started crying, not sobbing, not wailing, just quiet, broken tears rolling down her cheeks as she shook her head. This isn't right," she whispered. "There has to be a mistake." I almost laughed. "A mistake?" "You had an affair," I growled. "Stop lying to me, Sarah. Stop crying and tell me the truth." "I don't know what happened," she sobbed, clutching the baby tighter. "I never cheated, I swear. I don't understand." "Enough." My voice was raw. "If you won't tell me, someone will." I turned on my heel and stormed out, leaving her standing there, still pleading, still crying. I didn't care. Was going to get answers. I gathered the family, my parents, my brother. We sat in the living room, the air so thick with tension it felt like it might suffocate us all. Sarah sat on the couch, her face pale, her hands gripping the baby like a lifeline. My mother kept looking between us, her brow furrowed in confusion. "What is this about?" I took a deep breath. My voice came out hoarse. "The baby isn't mine." Silence. Sarah let out a shaky breath. "I don't know how—" I ignored her. I turned to my brother. "Was it you?" Danny's eyes widened. "What?" I took a step forward. "Was it you?" He shot up from his chair. "Jesus Christ, no!" I didn't believe him. I lunged, grabbing him by the collar, shoving him against the wall. "Tell me the truth." He shoved me back, rage flashing in his eyes. "I would never—" I punched him. Hard. His head snapped to the side, but before I could hit him again, strong hands grabbed me, my father's. "Stop this!" Dad's voice boomed, but I didn't stop. I broke free, grabbing the nearest thing I could find, a hammer from the shelf. I raised it high, ready to make someone talk, ready to break something, anything, because the pain inside me was unbearable, and then a voice stopped me cold. It was me. I froze. Slowly, I turned. My father stood there, his face pale, his hands trembling. "What?" My voice barely came out. Dad swallowed hard. His eyes darted to Sarah, then back to me. "It was me," he whispered again, voice cracking. For a long moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Then my mother gasped, sharp and broken. She clutched her chest, her body swaying. I watched, unable to move, as she collapsed to the floor. No one spoke. My father fell to his knees beside my mother, his hands hovering over her as if he didn't know what to do. Sarah sobbed into her hands, her body trembling. And me? I stood there, hammer still, in my grip, staring at the man I had spent my whole life looking up to, the father of my wife's child, the betrayer of everything I had ever known. I wanted to scream, to hit something, to rip the world apart with my bare hands. Instead, I dropped the hammer. It hit the floor with a hollow thud, and I walked out the door. I don't remember leaving the house. 1 second, I was standing in the wreckage of my life, my mother unconscious on the floor, my father on his knees, Sarah sobbing into her hands. And the next, I was outside, the cold night air hitting my face like a slap. I drove. Nowhere in particular, just away. Away from the lies, the betrayal, the weight crushing my chest. The road blurred under the headlights, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just drove. Everything fell apart. After that night, my mother survived, but she was never the same. A heart attack, the doctors said, stress-induced. She spent a week in the hospital, silent, staring at the wall like the world had ceased to make sense. Danny moved out. He couldn't stand to be in the same house as our father. "I can't look at him," he muttered when he came to grab his things. He didn't say much else, just packed a bag and left, slamming the door behind him. And me? I did the only thing I could do. I took my mother in. She wasn't strong enough to be alone, and I didn't trust my father to take care of her anymore. So I moved her into my house, the one I had built for my family. But there was no family left. I never spoke to Sarah again, not once. I didn't yell at her. I didn't demand answers. I didn't beg for explanations that didn't matter. I just left her there, on the farm, with my father, with his child. She tried to call me, at first every day, then once a week, then once a month. I never picked up. I couldn't. What was there to say? Months passed. I threw myself into work, long hours that left me too exhausted to think. I took care of my mother, made sure she ate, took her medication, and I waited for the rage to come. The breakdown. The moment where I'd finally snap scream, punch a hole in the wall, drown myself in whiskey. But it never came. Instead, there was only silence. A hollow, aching emptiness that settled deep inside me, like a wound too deep to heal. But maybe that was better. Maybe feeling nothing was safer than feeling everything. Then one night, she came back. I had just gotten home, setting down a bag of groceries, when I heard the knock. Slow, hesitant. For a moment, I didn't move. Then, heart hammering, I opened the door, and there she was, Sarah. She looked different, thinner, paler. There were dark circles under her eyes, her hair pulled into a loose ponytail, strands falling over her face, and in her hand, a single suitcase. I stared at it, then at her. She swallowed hard. I made a mistake. Her voice was barely above a whisper, trembling, desperate. I didn't say a word. She stepped forward, her eyes pleading. I thought I could do it. Stay there. Be a mother. But I can't. She exhaled shakily, then lifted her chin, eyes glistening. I love you. I didn't react, didn't move, because all I felt in that moment was nothing. Not rage, not heartbreak, not longing, just an empty, quiet acceptance. She was too late. Finally, I spoke. My voice was calm, steady, cold. You made your choice. Sarah! Her breath hitched. And I made mine. Her lips parted as if she had more to say, but I didn't give her the chance. I took a step back, my grip tightening on the door. Go back to your family, she flinched. You are my family. I let out a soft, bitter chuckle. No, I was your husband. You had a family. With me. And then you chose him. Tears spilled over her cheeks. But I didn't care. You don't understand, she whispered. I didn't mean... I tilted my head. Tell me, Sarah. When you laid in bed with him, when you carried his child, when exactly did you start regretting it? She let out a quiet sob. Please. I shook my head, exhaling sharply. You love me? Don't forget whose child. You have, in your arms. The words hit her like a slap. Her whole body trembled, and for a second I thought she might collapse right there on my doorstep. But I didn't care. I would not care. I reached for the door, my voice devoid of anything but finality. Goodbye, Sarah. And then I shut the door in her face. I stood there for a long time, listening. A muffled sob, the shuffle of feet, the sound of her suitcase wheels dragging against the pavement as she walked away. I didn't move until silence settled again, and then I exhaled. A long, slow breath that felt like I was letting go of something heavy, something I had been carrying for too long. For the first time in months, I felt something other than emptiness. Relief. The door was closed, and so was that chapter of my life.